Okay, welcome back. Just finished up, hopefully, watching the sum and difference of two cubes here, which is another method to factor. And now what I want to show you is how we do what's called factoring by grouping. And anytime you want to factor by grouping is when you have four terms. So here's the general process. You're going to take those four terms, you're going to group them in pairs, you're going to then factor each pair individually, looking for greatest common factor, and then you're going to regroup and see if there's anything else that we have to do, particularly any of those three things. Okay, so let's take a look at this first example, and then we'll do this one tomorrow in class as practice. So let me just write it down again real quick. So I got z to the third plus 5z squared minus 4z minus 20. Okay? So the first step that it says for us to do is we want to group it in pairs. And what I mean by that is you take your first one and you group it, and you take your second one and you group it. Okay? So that's the first step. Real hard, right? Grouping it in pairs. Now, the second thing we want to do is we want to factor each pair. And so what I mean by that is I want to look at this set of parentheses and factor out a greatest common factor, and look at this set of parentheses and factor out a greatest common factor. Okay? And you'll see something that happens. So if I factor out a GCF from here, you can see this is z to the third, and this is 5z to the squared. So what they have in common is a z squared. And when I factor out a z squared from z to the third, I have z. And when I factor it from 5z squared, I have 5. So my factored version of that first pair is z squared times the quantity z plus 5. In this second one, notice this is negative 4z and negative 20. Both of those are divisible by negative 4, so I can factor out a negative 4. And I have z when I factor a negative 4 out of here. But notice when I factor a negative 20, factor out a negative 4, that takes care of the negative, and I have z plus 5. Okay? So that's the second step, factor each pair. Now, check this out. Notice that I have a z plus 5 in parentheses here, and I have a z plus 5 in parentheses here. When you're factoring by grouping, you always need this to happen, where you get the same thing left over in parentheses after you've pulled out the GCF. Okay? So, got that set of parentheses? That's good. They're the same. That's what we want. So now the last step is we want to regroup. And by regrouping, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the two things that are on the outside of the parentheses, in this case the z squared and the minus 4, and I'm going to regroup those, z squared minus 4, so that's going to be one of my factors. And then I take what's inside of the parentheses here, which in this case is the z plus 5, and that's my second group. So z to the third plus 5z squared minus 4z minus 20 will factor into this right here. In other words, if I were to take this right here, the z squared minus 4 times z plus 5, and I were to run it through magic squares, I'd get this up here. Okay? So that's the regrouping, or the factoring with four terms, factoring by grouping process. But what we have to look at now is down here, do I have any of these other three situations? And you can see I do. I have the difference of two squares right here. So this can be written as z squared minus 2 squared, like that. Okay? And then, of course, we got to bring down the z plus 5. Now, we know how to factor this, difference of two squares, and some of us can even skip over this step. This is going to be z plus 2 and z minus 2. And then, of course, we need to bring down our z plus 5. This is now factored completely. And if we want to do other things with this, if we're asked to, we can go ahead and do that. But we're just asked to factor this completely. So we're all done.